Boker Tov, good morning, and Shalom. May God's peace be with you. This week, we are going to be finishing the book of Numbers, or Bamidbar, whichever title that you prefer to refer to this book as. Now, I'm going to go through some background. First, the time frame for this is approximately 5 months before they cross over the Jordan River and go into the Promised Land. It's also got a location which takes place in the plains or on the plains of Moab. Now, there's two themes that I came up for this particular chapter that we'll be reading, or chapters 28 through 36. And the first one is, it's reminders of the journey and its teachings. The second one is where home is for the new nation of Israel. So we're going to start off with chapter 28, and God gives us some reminders about the offerings that he has commanded them to do. And it says that these are to be done at appointed times. Now, I want to clarify that phrase because you will see it a lot in the Bible, appointed times. And I look at it in kind of a comparison to, say, a doctor's visit. Now, in a doctor's visit, you have a location. You typically are going to meet at the doctor's office, and you usually have a time that you're going to meet, say 10 o'clock. However, as many of us experience, they ask you to be there at least 10 minutes early, so you arrive at 9:50. Sometimes they'll take you in at 9:55, which is great. But sometimes you wait in the waiting room, and they don't call you back until 10:15. That is still your appointed time. Sometimes they even make you stay a little bit longer before they call you back. But that's how the Hebrews kind of look at an appointed time. It's more of a place and a time so that you can come together. So it's more of the meeting that's appropriate here and that we want to talk about. So with that, the first offering is to be a daily offering. Now, this was spoken about in Exodus 29, 38, and through 39. And it's the exact same offering that we're talking about. It was to be 2 lambs and some flour and some oil and a drink offering. In the 2 different versions, they may be worded a little differently, such as one of them, I think, at least in my NIV Bible, says in the morning and in the evening. And then in the Exodus version, it says in the morning and at twilight. So it's basically the same thing, just slightly different wording. Now, in the New Testament, we are told that as Christians, we are to be a day-by-day sacrifice. You'll find that in your handouts. I hope everybody's got their handouts. And of course, in the New Testament, that's Luke 9, Acts 2, 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, and Hebrews that you'll find that. Now, the second time frame was a weekly offering that they were commanded to do. And the fact that it's a weekly offering should kind of tell you that there's 7 days, which reminds us of Shabbat, which is the Hebrew word for the Sabbath. So this offering was to take place on the 7th day of the week. And in addition to the daily offering that they were to give, they were to add 2 more lambs. So you had 2 lambs sacrificed in the morning and 2 lambs sacrificed in the evening or twilight, along with, of course, the flour and the drink offerings. So we too are to be like the psalmist says, seeking the Lord in the morning, Psalms 5:3 and 88:13, and in the evening, Psalms 63:6 and 141:2. Now, the third and the fourth time frames that God commands offering for are a little bit more difficult for me to explain, so I need a visual for my explanations. So with the help, we've got a calendar up here. And as you can see, this black area, actually you can go this way, that is a Gregorian calendar, and I'm sure you're all familiar with that because in today's world, that is the calendar that most of the world goes by. It was based on a solar calendar, and they came up with it basically so farmers would know when to plant and when to harvest. Okay? Now, prior to the book of Chronicles, which is further along in our Bible, there appeared to have been a lunar calendar that the Hebrews used. And there were actually 4 specific months that are named in both Exodus and 1 Kings. But you won't find them here on this calendar. The reason for that is that after the Babylonian exile, if you remember that, Christy, when we first started, so some of you may not know this, had gone over a brief overview of the entire Bible. And so when she talks about the Babylonian exile, you can go to YouTube and see that presentation. She did a great job on that, but you'll understand the different kingdoms and how one of them was taken captive by Babylonia. Now, the current Jewish calendar is this right here. And this is the first month, goes around like this. Now I'm going to go in the weeds, sorry, just for a second, because I found this interesting, that because this calendar was developed basically after they'd been in Babylon, and they took some of these names and kind of referenced them against the Babylonian gods. So that's not too cool, and like I said, that's weeds we don't want to worry about. But the important thing is getting back to the monthly offering. The first day of each month, and in Hebrew, it's called Chodesh, which also can mean a new moon. So each month, the very first day of the month started when there was a new moon. That's how they knew the different months. Each month there was a new moon, and they were to give an offering. And of course, during those offerings, they had a lot more than the lamb. They had cattle and some other things, but you can read about that. Now, you'll recall Janaea did a good job of this one. For the 4th appointed time for offerings, it talks about these feasts. So there's to be feasts and festivals that are to happen throughout the year, and there's going to be offerings at those. Okay? And like I say, Janaea did a great job on this. She also mentioned a book that you could use as a reference, and I've listed it there on your handout. It was by Michael Norton. So you may want to check out and purchase that book or borrow it from someone. So these are the 4 offerings or time frames, appointed times for offerings. This now brings me to chapter 30. Psalm 61:8 says, "Then I will ever sing in praise of your name and fulfill my vows day after day." Anybody notice kind of a theme here going along? Lots of offerings taking place in the tabernacle, but also we need to in our hearts and our prayer time. Indeed, the God that we serve is an omnipresent God who is in all ranges of time and places. Now, speaking of vows, vows are basically a sacred promise, and as such, should not be broken. However, in this chapter, Moses shares God's command concerning vows taken by women. Now, this was in this time frame, and the woman's vow depended upon her husband or her father to be a valid vow. So you'll want to read about that, especially those that want to be concerned with feminism. But you'll realize that God actually is protecting the women. The other thing for women that are divorced or widowed or maybe never married, their vows, they didn't have quite the protection from. So they needed to make sure that whatever vows they took, they would be obedient with fulfilling. Now, you may remember last week, I told you that the Midianites became the enemy of Israel because of the chief's daughter. Well, in chapter 31, you're going to find that God had Moses send the Israelite army into war with the Midianites. God's army killed every man, including Balaam. Remember Balaam, the donkey beater? Well, when they came back, the soldiers brought with them their spoils, and they stopped just outside a camp, and Moses was angry. He was angry because they also brought back the Midianite women and their children. Moses then reminded them that the women were the ones who had fallen into Balaam's plot to cause the plague, which Phinehas had to take drastic action to stop. So Midian is a type of the world. We are told that we should not be of this world. Indeed, 1 John 2:15 through 16 tells us such. Therefore, a complete purification and cleansing of the soldiers and their spoils was to take place, including the killing of non-virgin women and all the boys that were captured. Now, after this war on Midian soil was cleansed by the elimination of the inhabitants there, two tribes, Reuben and Gad, noticed that there was quality and suitable land for them on this east side of the Jordan. So they asked Moses and Eleazar, some people pronounce it as Eleazar, to grant them ownership of these lands, specifically Yazar and Gilad. Now, the purpose they had for these lands was that the Reubenites and Gadites wanted to build pens for their huge herds of livestock and for their women and children to have a place to call their own. Now, Moses was pretty concerned over this, because if these two tribes stayed on the east side of the promised land, then they would have less soldiers to go in and actually take over the promised land. So they made a promise to Moses, basically another vow or an oath, that they would go with the rest of the Israelite nation and go in and clear it out, and then once everything was settled, they would go back to be with their families. So indeed, that was the case. They got the land on the east side of the Jordan River, and so too, the half of the Manasseh tribe ended up getting some land on the east side of the river, kind of on the north end. You'll see I'll have a map up there pretty soon. So there was basically now 9.5 tribes that the promised land was going to be inhabited by, as far as the Israelites. So this brings us to chapter 33. Now, this kind of reminds me of Star Trek, because basically God asked Moses to give a record or an account of where they went. So it's kind of like Stardate 3279, Captain's Log. Okay? Kind of corny, but that's what I thought of when I saw that. And so you can see up here, though, here's our map, that Moses had to take account that they started here in Egypt and came down and so forth. Here's what they assumed to be Mount Sinai. That's disputed. Some people say it's over here. You'll find different maps that are all going to be kind of a little bit different, but it's basically this general vicinity. Here's where the quail were. The snakes were up in this area. So basically, when you read through, you're going to see a whole bunch of different cities. They came here, then they departed, they went here. You're going to see these cities, and we just honestly don't know for a fact, because over time, city names change, obviously, and some cities disappear altogether. So God also gives them borders, and this is something that is a little bit more clear, that right in through here is where the Zin Desert is. So God said, the promised land on the south side is going to be right here. Now, it's real easy for the border of the west. It's going to be right here where the Mediterranean Sea is. They couldn't go anywhere else. But then the east border was to be here. There's the Jordan River, and then the Dead Sea or Salt Sea. So on the north end, it's not really clear. Some of those cities just, I couldn't find any maps with them on it. So we remember that in, where am I now? Sorry, I got lost. Oh, the tribes. The tribes of the Levites. They were not to inherit any land to develop. So they didn't get any of that land. But they needed someplace to live. So God gave them, and he told the nation to give the Israelites towns throughout the nation, and he gave them 42 towns that they could live in. Moreover, he gave them an additional 6 towns that were to be given as a refuge. They were called the cities of refuge, and there were 6 of them. And we need another map. Here we go. Okay, so here's the Jordan River, there's the Dead Sea, here's the Mediterranean Sea. So you can see these little stars. We got 3 of them on the west side of the River Jordan, and then we got 3 on the east side. So you're going to read about the cities of refuge, and I've got a little assignment for you, because I'm not going to tell you any more about that other than show you this picture. This person here is what they call the Blood Avenger, okay? And there were many different Blood Avengers. I want you to find out what a Blood Avenger is. And then this person here would be the person who runs away into the city of refuge. Here's a Levite. And I want you to find out why that person would be running away. So that's kind of one of your assignments for this week. Now, the last portion that I'm going to talk about, forgot one thing. The cities of refuge can be seen as types of Christ, in whom sinners find a refuge from the destroyer of our souls. Hebrews 6:18. Okay, so the last portion that we're going to talk about is the law regarding inheritance. Now, the inherited land for the different tribes was to remain in the tribe of the family of their ancestors. And this was brought up because if you remember the daughters of Zelophehad and their unique situation, well, they wanted to make sure that the tribe didn't lose land by having their women marry from another tribe and then have that cross inheritance happening. So they were told by Moses that, they can have their land, but they needed to marry within the tribe. So indeed, the daughters ended up marrying their paternal cousins. So this historic account of events, places, and spent Bamidbar concludes with an anticipation for the nation of Israel finally being able to see the fruition of the Abrahamic covenant and prophecy coming into being. I hope each one of you were able to collect treasurable knowledge souvenirs from your journey in the wilderness this month. I know for myself, I did find a souvenir, and my souvenir is repentance. I am taking away from Bamidbar that I need to leave my past behind, and in Hebrew, repentance means a 180-degree turn. So I need to leave what was behind, let it go, and move on. Next week, we're going to be starting Deuteronomy, which is the last book of the Torah. Now I want you to please take the rest of our appointed time to pray with one another. And I want to say Todah Rabbah, which in Hebrew means thank you very much.